Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, winding stroll through the unexpectedly tangled history of methadone. Yes, methadone. The one drug that started out as a heroic knight in shining armour, here to save people from heroin, and somehow ended up as the surprise villain hiding under your bed. And since this is our brand new channel, before you settle in, maybe take a second to hit like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what you find here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights, set your fan to a nostalgic 1960s pharmaceutical office, tuck yourself in, and get ready to learn more about methadone than your doctor would ever admit. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered if methadone was really invented by Nazis? Could you get a prescription in 1972 for being just a little too enthusiastic about jazz? How did we go from saving lives to creating the world's most polite, government-approved opioid lineups? Why does every rehab story sound like a Kafka novel but with worse coffee? And most importantly, in the endless game of fixing addiction, is it possible to trade one monster for another and still win? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1964, the year methadone becomes America's favourite accidental controversy. Don't worry, your tie is crooked, the coffee is cold, and the war on drugs hasn't even had its morning cigarette yet. Good luck. In the shadowy laboratories of 1939 Germany, scientists scrambling for a morphine alternative stumble on a synthetic opioid. They call it dolorphine, which sounds like a pool toy but is definitely not. It's strong, long-lasting, and as addictive as government paperwork. The only catch? It will accidentally change world history. Let's set the scene. It's Berlin, and every laboratory is humming with anxious energy. There's the low buzz of fluorescent lights, the clink of glassware, and somewhere a very harried chemist is muttering in German about deadlines and dictators. If you squint, you can almost smell the room. A mixture of formaldehyde, cigarettes, and a lingering whiff of existential dread. Welcome to 1939, where the only thing more popular than military parades is the search for a miracle drug to soothe all the wounds that come from, well, starting World War II. At the time, Germany has a very specific problem. Thanks to a long-standing tradition of waging spectacularly ambitious wars, the country is running low on morphine. Morphine, you see, is the painkiller of choice for everything from battlefield injuries to migraines brought on by hearing Wagner one too many times. But morphine comes from opium, and opium comes from poppies, and poppies do not care for cold, northern climates or surprise air raids. Cue the scientists summoned by the Ministry of Health with the cheerful mandate, invent something as good as morphine, but German. So they go to work. You can almost picture them, thick glasses, lab coats, and enough chemical stains to be considered a walking OSHA violation. The mission is simple. Create a synthetic opioid that can be manufactured in a factory, no poppy fields required. If you're imagining a glamorous eureka moment, adjust your expectations. Real breakthroughs are less eureka and more. Did you just spill that? Is it supposed to fizz like that? After endless hours and more than a few ruined lunches, the team at IG Farben, the chemical megacorp of the day, lands on a substance they call methadone. For marketing reasons, they dub it dolorphine, which sounds reassuringly pleasant, like something you'd give a sick dolphin. In reality, it's a powerful opioid that could knock out an elephant, or at least a particularly grumpy field medic. How does it work? Well, methadone doesn't just dull pain, it lingers. It hangs around in the body like an awkward party guest, long after the actual party, or in this case surgery, is over. This, on paper, makes it perfect for wounded soldiers. One dose and you're comfortable for hours. In practice, it's a bit like giving someone a blanket that slowly turns into a weighted duvet and then refuses to leave. Comforting, but with consequences. Now, you'd think this breakthrough would make the inventors instant celebrities, or at least earn them a nice bonus. Instead, they get a certificate, a handshake, and the knowledge that they've just handed the Third Reich a powerful new tool. It's hard to celebrate when your boss is yelling about supply lines and total victory. Also, there are probably spies in the building, and everyone's a little paranoid. But let's talk about why this even matters. In a time when the world is falling apart, a long-lasting painkiller is the kind of thing that changes how wars are fought and who survives to tell the tale. Every wounded soldier who makes it home because he's not writhing in agony has methadone in his bloodstream, and a chemist with too many coffee stains on his notebook to thank. Of course, the post-war years are looming, and no one in the lab is thinking much about what comes next. There's no way to predict that Dolafine will eventually be rebranded, shipped overseas, and handed out in little white cups by American doctors who think they've found the solution to heroin addiction. Right now, it's just another bottle on the shelf, filed away under problems for the next generation. And that, dear listener, is how a group of tired chemists, a desperate government, and a global crisis came together to invent a drug that would one day be both saviour and scapegoat on the world stage. All in a day's work. Just don't ask them to fill out the paperwork. Let's move on and see what happens when Dolafine leaves the laboratory and starts its unlikely journey across the Atlantic. Spoiler, things are about to get much, much weirder. When the dust of World War II settles, Dolafine quietly immigrates to the United States alongside other less talked about Nazi exports, like questionable haircuts. American doctors eye this new chemical with interest. Surely nothing invented in a 1930s German lab could have any downsides. Let's take a moment to picture America in the late 1940s. The war is over, everyone is exhausted, broke, and suddenly very into canned pineapple. Victory parades are giving way to existential dread, and there's a growing fascination with all things modern and scientific, preferably with a vaguely European accent. This is the golden age of medical optimism, when any pill can be a miracle and any miracle can be shipped in a brown bottle for just $3.99. Enter Methadone, stage left, wearing a trench coat and trying not to mention its German resume. The United States, having just spent years fighting the makers of Dolafine, now finds itself inheriting their chemistry sets. It's a little awkward, like suddenly adopting the enemy's family pet and hoping it doesn't bite. Still, American pharmaceutical companies are always on the hunt for something new to patent. They quickly rebrand Dolafine. After all, nothing says fresh start like a new name, and quietly erase any mention of its origins. Methadone sounds less like a Bond villain and more like a respectable dinner guest. The only trace of its past is the lingering suspicion that anything this potent must come with a catch. At first, Methadone is welcomed as a painkiller, a new hero for a country dealing with the aftershocks of war wounds, car crashes, and the sudden spike in people lifting heavy things for fun. Hospitals and doctors prescribe it for everything from broken bones to bad backs to the vague, all-American condition known as nerves. For a while, it seems like Methadone might just be the cure-all everyone's been waiting for. But there's a hitch. American doctors are starting to notice that their patients aren't just feeling better, they're feeling better for a suspiciously long time. Methadone lingers in the body, its effects sticking around hours longer than traditional painkillers. Patients who take it wake up with less pain and, often, an odd feeling that their bodies have become especially loyal to their new medication. As prescriptions rise, so do stories of patients who can't quite remember how to function without their daily dose. It turns out swapping morphine for methadone is like trading a messy breakup for a codependent relationship. Still, for many physicians, methadone feels like progress. It's modern, it's efficient, and it comes with less social baggage than morphine. Pharmaceutical reps hand out free samples at conferences like Candy at Halloween. If you're a doctor in 1952, you probably have a methadone pen, a methadone notepad, and at least one patient who keeps dropping by just to say hi. There's even talk of putting methadone in cough syrup because if you're going to soothe a sore throat, why not numb everything else while you're at it? Meanwhile, somewhere in a government office, a very serious person with a very serious moustache starts to worry. Wasn't this whole plan supposed to get us off addictive drugs? The answer is complicated, and the paperwork is even worse. By the late 1950s, methadone's popularity begins to waver. Rumours swirl about dependency and side effects. Addiction specialists, back when that meant guy who reads a lot about opium, start whispering that methadone might just be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Public health officials, never ones to admit defeat, double down on careful regulation and somber pamphlets about responsible use. Spoiler alert, nobody actually reads the pamphlets. Through it all, methadone hangs around. It slips quietly from pain clinics to research hospitals to the still hidden world of addiction treatment. The seeds are planted for its next role as a saviour and eventually a new kind of villain. So, here we are. A German invention, repackaged and unleashed on the American public, is about to begin its strangest chapter yet. Stay tuned. Things are about to get even more complicated, and the paperwork is only getting thicker. By the 1950s, American hospitals are doling out methadone to patients with everything from stubbed toes to existential crises. But behind closed doors, researchers begin to wonder, could this be the key to fixing addiction? Or is this just history's first step in replacing one problem with another? Let's set the scene. It's the era of starched white coats, endless optimism, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights in every hallway. Doctors stride the halls like minor gods, pens clicking, charts flipping, and somewhere in the distance, a nurse quietly curses the invention of clipboards. Methadone, meanwhile, is quickly becoming the office favourite, a pharmaceutical multi-tool that promises to end pain, suffering, and, if you listen to the marketing team, maybe even bad moods. You, dear listener, are an average patient in 1955. Perhaps you wrenched your back trying to move a sofa, or maybe you just need something for the gnawing ache that keeps you up at night. The doctor doesn't hesitate. Methadone is the prescription pad's answer to everything short of a broken heart. You swallow the first dose and marvel at how the world softens around the edges. The pain dulls, your thoughts float, and for a few glorious hours the everyday stresses of atomic age America melt away. But while the public is busy counting their pain-free blessings, a handful of scientists are peering over their glasses with increasing suspicion. Why does everyone seem a little too enthusiastic about their refills? Why are some patients dropping by just to say hello, looking like they might actually try to hug the pharmacist? The whispers start. Could methadone be as sticky as the drugs it was meant to replace? So the research begins, quietly, almost furtively. In back offices and basement labs, doctors and social scientists start recruiting volunteers, many of whom are only too eager for a free supply of something that takes the edge off. The studies are awkward, to say the least. In one corner, earnest researchers ask probing questions about quality of life and long-term satisfaction. In the other corner, participants nod along while mentally calculating how much they can squirrel away for later. If you've ever seen a group therapy session led by a man who still says groovy unironically, you've got the right mental image. The results trickle in, and they're not what anyone expected. Yes, methadone can help some people break the cycle of heroin use, but instead of freedom, what emerges is a strange kind of limbo, a world where addiction is managed, not erased. Now, instead of chasing the next high in a dark alley, people are chasing clinic appointments and watching the clock for their next dose. The social engineers who dreamed of eradicating addiction discover that human stubbornness is much harder to dose than a bottle of pills. Still, there's hope in the air. This is, after all, the golden age of can-do optimism. Social workers, doctors, and the occasional philosopher gather to debate. If we can't cure addiction, can we at least make it manageable? Is it better to be dependent on a legal, clean, government-regulated opioid than risk life and limb on the street? The debate gets heated, and at some point someone tries to draw a Venn diagram. it doesn't help. Meanwhile, the patients themselves have opinions, though nobody seems to ask them. Some are thrilled to have stability, even if it's built on a chemical foundation. Others feel trapped, shuffling through daily routines, paperwork, and the not-so-gentle side effects of methadone itself. If you're looking for a happy ending, this isn't the chapter for you. What emerges from these early experiments is a brand new question. Can you engineer society through chemistry? Can you turn the chaotic, unpredictable pain of addiction into something structured, routine, even bureaucratic? Or are we just kicking the can down the road, trading one set of chains for another, a little more polished but just as binding? And so, with clipboards full of notes and a growing sense of unease, the early experimenters pass the torch. The age of the methadone clinic is about to begin, equal parts hope, compromise, and a whole lot of paperwork. It's the 1960s, and heroin has made itself very comfortable in the cities. Politicians panic, police are overwhelmed, and your local jazz musician has just discovered he can't afford rent or his habit. Enter methadone, promising to sweep the streets clean, one tiny paper cup at a time. Let's set the scene. The sidewalks of New York, Detroit, Chicago, cities humming with ambition, exhaust, and an undercurrent of worry. Neon flickers in the rain, taxis blare, and somewhere a tired soul is pawning a trumpet for enough cash to make it through another night. Heroin is no longer the dark secret of smoky jazz clubs. It's gone mainstream, with users from every walk of life, students, labourers, parents, even that nice woman who bakes cinnamon rolls on your floor. The numbers climb, and the mood shifts. Newspapers run front-page stories about the new urban plague, featuring shadowy silhouettes lurking in alleys and clutching arms. Police departments issue warnings and, if you're lucky, an extra patrol. But mostly, the response is confusion bordering on chaos. Addiction, it turns out, doesn't wait politely for social consensus or government funding. It spreads quietly, hungrily, riding in on every wave of loneliness and unrest that city living can offer. You, the hypothetical city dweller, can't escape it. Maybe your neighbour's mail piles up and nobody sees him for days. Maybe your favourite record store closes after another break-in. If you're a politician, you're holding emergency meetings and shaking hands with experts who promise they have a solution, as long as someone else pays for it. If you're a parent, you double bolt the door and hope your kids are learning the right lessons at school, whatever those are this week. Then just when it seems the whole city might dissolve into despair and sirens, the scientists step up clutching their solution in little plastic bottles. Methadone. The clinical, measured, government-approved answer. It's clean, legal, and best of all, administered under supervision, so nobody has to wonder where their next fix is coming from. The theory is almost poetic in its simplicity. Give people a safer, longer-lasting alternative, and the chaos will fade. Streets will empty, crime will drop, and cities will go back to being places where you only lose your wallet if you leave it in a cab, not because someone needs a quick heroin score. Methadone clinics sprout in neighbourhoods hit hardest by the epidemic. Their waiting rooms are filled with faces, old and young, anxious and hopeful, dressed for job interviews or just another day surviving. If you've ever stood in line at the DMV, you have a sense of the bureaucracy. Now add the weight of 1,000 private struggles, and maybe a faint smell of disinfectant. The press, as always, is divided. Some hail methadone as a miracle, the chemical broom sweeping addiction off the streets. Others mutter about trading one evil for another, or conjure visions of methadone zombies haunting city parks. Either way, there's no ignoring it. The clinics are here, and the city is changing. For the users themselves, it's complicated. Methadone isn't heroin. There's no euphoric rush, just a slow, measured return to something like normalcy. You get up, you take your dose, you try to find a job or keep the one you've got. For many, It's the first time in years that tomorrow looks possible. For others, it's another set of hoops to jump through, another line to stand in, another reminder that the solution comes with a side of public scrutiny and endless paperwork. Methadone doesn't solve everything. The headlines fade, but the daily grind remains. Clinic visits, judgmental stares, the quiet relief of one more day without crisis. But in a world spinning out of control, even a little stability feels revolutionary. And so, with politicians congratulating themselves and users finding cautious hope at the bottom of a paper cup, the city moves forward. Heroin's reign isn't over, but a new contender has entered the ring, one dose at a time. Enter doctors. Marie Niswander and Vincent Dole, a psychiatrist power couple with a wild theory. Heroin addiction is a chronic disease, not a moral failing. Their weapon? Daily methadone maintenance. Their laboratory? New York City. Their goal? To outstubborn the world's most stubborn drug. Let's rewind to the early 1960s, when most doctors still believed addiction was just a personality flaw, something you could shame, punish, or pray out of someone if you really tried. The prevailing wisdom: if you're addicted, you must secretly enjoy suffering, and probably also jazz. Enter Vincent Dole, a researcher with the patience of a saint and the wardrobe of a mildly depressed college professor. Alongside him, Marie Niswander, a psychiatrist and former psychoanalyst with a knack for empathy, sharp suits, and asking the questions nobody else dared. Their partnership is legendary. Dole is methodical, fascinated by data, and determined to fix what everyone else sees as unfixable. Niswander is fearless, wading into neighborhoods and clinics most doctors avoid, actually listening to patients instead of lecturing them. Together they make an odd pair at faculty mixers, but in the messy, chaotic world of 1960s New York, they're exactly what the city needs. The revolution starts in a converted hospital ward that smells faintly of floor polish and hope. Patients shuffle in, some skeptical, others desperate, all carrying the weight of 1,000 failed promises. Heroin, after all, is the kind of addiction that chews up optimism and spits it out as cynicism. But Dole and Niswander aren't here to scold. They're here to run an experiment. The method, methadone, dispensed daily, carefully measured, and always under supervision. The goal? See what happens when the merry-go-round of withdrawal and relapse finally slows down. Here's the catch. The results aren't what anyone expects. Instead of the hazy, defeated faces everyone's used to, the patients on methadone begin to change. Slowly, quietly, things start working again. People show up on time. Some find jobs, others repair relationships, start eating real meals, and even remember their own birthdays. It's not a cure, but it's a chance to live, something most of them haven't had in years. Word spreads quickly. The press sniffs a story, and suddenly the experiment is headline news. Plastic cups, real hope, scientists battle addiction with chemistry. Politicians take notice. So do critics, who mutter about substituting one addiction for another, apparently forgetting that the alternative is jail, hospital, or a nameless grave. Dole and Niswander keep working unfazed by the peanut gallery. Their data is clear. Methadone doesn't make people high, it makes them human again. It lets life creep back in, one breakfast, one job interview, one quiet afternoon at a time. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. Traditionalists in medicine clutch their pearls. Moralists write angry letters to the editor. Someone, somewhere, accuses the doctors of social engineering, which is not nearly as glamorous as it sounds. Dole and Niswander respond with more studies, more data, and occasionally a dry remark that you can't exactly run a controlled trial on hope. But for the people lining up at the clinic each morning, the verdict is in. Methadone maintenance isn't about swapping highs. It's about stability, about days that don't begin and end with withdrawal, about rebuilding a sense of normalcy in a world that rarely feels safe or predictable. For the first time, addiction is treated not as a shameful secret, but as a chronic medical condition, something you manage, not something you confess in whispers. And that's how, with a wild theory and a plastic cup, Doctors Dole and Niswander ignite a revolution, one that will echo through addiction treatment for decades to come, quiet, persistent, and a little bit stubborn. Because sometimes the most radical act is just helping people start again, one dose at a time. Suddenly addiction treatment isn't a confessional, it's a queue. Methadone clinics pop up, turning city corners into orderly lines of people clutching cups of liquid hope. Privacy is out, bureaucracy is in, and your therapist is now a government employee with a clipboard. Let's step inside. Imagine a drab building sandwiched between a laundromat and a discount shoe store. The sign says, Health Services, but everyone in the neighbourhood knows exactly what's happening inside. As you push open the heavy glass door, the first thing that hits you is the smell. A heady blend of disinfectant, old coffee, and a faint whiff of anticipation. The second thing, the line. It snakes along the wall past battered chairs, a faded community bulletin board, and a sad plastic plant that hasn't been watered since Nixon was in office. You join the queue, cup in hand, eyes drifting to the floor tiles, cracked, but so familiar you could probably draw them from memory. Conversation is low and murmured, but there's a strange sense of camaraderie here. Some people exchange glances or a quick nod, a silent acknowledgement that you're all part of the same odd club, survivors of the daily methadone ritual. This isn't group therapy. There are no couches to sink into, no tissues passed across the circle. Instead, you shuffle forward at the pace of government paperwork, eyeing the clock and hoping today's appointment doesn't make you late for work or cost you your job entirely. It's a strange kind of normal, trading the secrecy and chaos of street drugs for the reliable inconvenience of clinic hours and compliance checks. Privacy, gone. Instead, you're on a first-name basis with the nurse, the front desk clerk, and at least 3 people from your old neighbourhood you hoped you'd never see again. Every step in line is a dance with bureaucracy. Forms need filling, boxes need checking, signatures need updating. You answer the same questions you answered yesterday and the day before that. Any changes in your medication? Are you feeling safe at home? Have you thought about using other substances? The therapist, now a data collector, types your answers without looking up. You start to wonder if they could recite your life story from memory or just your social security number. There's a rhythm to clinic mornings. Someone always asks about the weather. Someone else jokes about the coffee, which is universally terrible. Sometimes, if you're lucky, someone brings in donuts. The ritual is comforting in its predictability, and yet there's a nagging sense that everything here is both temporary and eternal. Today's line will be replaced by tomorrow's, but the chairs and the clock will outlast you all. When it's finally your turn, you step up to the counter, hand over your ID, and receive your daily dose. A plastic cup filled with thick, sweet liquid that tastes vaguely medicinal and unmistakably final. You swallow under the watchful eye of a nurse. No take-home bottles, no room for negotiation. Methadone clinics are many things, but flexible is not one of them. Some people complain about the rigidity, the lack of trust, the feeling of being processed like a package at the post office. Others are grateful for the order, the consistency, the fact that for the first time in years, they know exactly where they'll be at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. The clinic becomes a strange anchor, a place where people can measure their progress in months, years, or just one cup at a time. Outside, life rushes by. Kids heading to school, buses rumbling past, neighbours carrying groceries. Inside, the waiting room remains its own little universe, equal parts hope, resignation, and routine. You leave with a taste of methadone still in your mouth, a plastic cup in the trash, and the faint feeling that you've just survived another day. And tomorrow you'll be back, same time, same place, same quietly determined crowd, all waiting for a little bit of hope in a plastic cup. Early reports are glowing. Fewer overdoses, less crime, and an entire generation learning the joys of daily urine tests. But cracks appear. Is methadone actually a cure, or just the world's slowest, least fun merry-go-round? Critics sharpen their pitchforks. Let's rewind to those hopeful early years. The government and medical community, so often skeptical, suddenly have something to celebrate. Headlines tout methadone's miraculous powers, overdose deaths drop, crime rates dip, and clinics are busy enough to need new clipboards, and, apparently, new rules for bathroom access. For the first time in decades, cities have a new public health success story, complete with the kind of graphs that make politicians smile and budget committees slightly less grumpy. But look closer at those graphs, and a subtler picture emerges. Methadone isn't erasing addiction, it's moving it indoors, dressing it in clean shirts and sending it to work by 9 o'clock. The clinics run like clockwork. Patients arrive, paperwork shuffles, and nurses dispense little cups with all the ceremony of a communion wafer. You'd think, given the rituals, this was a spiritual rebirth. Instead, it's more like a daily truce, a ceasefire between chaos and control. At first, families rejoice. Their loved ones aren't disappearing for days, pawning the furniture, or showing up in court. Jobs are kept, meals are eaten, kids get help with homework, and the neighbours finally relax a bit about who's coming and going at odd hours. For many this is enough. For the first time in years, normal feels possible. Yet beneath this new order, anxiety simmers. Critics, everyone from rival doctors to outraged talk show hosts, point out that dependence hasn't vanished. It's just swapped uniforms. The old cycle of hustling for a fix is replaced by the new routine. Line up, check in, test your urine, and recite the right answers. One form of captivity exchanged for another, but this time with air conditioning and government-approved motivational posters. You start to hear grumbles from the people who actually stand in those lines. Sure, things are better, but is this living or just surviving with fewer sirens? Some miss the rush, that sharp edge of excitement that, for all its danger, made every day unpredictable. Others resent the paperwork, the endless appointments, the feeling of being watched, measured, and regulated down to the last drop. Urine tests, once a novelty, become a recurring ritual, more proof of compliance than progress. Meanwhile, the world outside isn't always so understanding. Stigma doesn't disappear just because addiction is managed instead of chaotic. Patients still hide their clinic cards, avoid certain conversations, and dodge the sideways glances from old friends. It turns out society loves a comeback story, but only if the cure looks exactly like everyone else's life. If you need a daily cup to get by, you're still suspect. Researchers keep debating. Some tout methadone as the best tool we have, insisting that maintenance is better than mayhem. Others insist we're enabling dependence, that we should be pushing for real recovery. Politicians predictably argue over funding, as if treatment is just a matter of the right spreadsheet column. And so the debate spirals on. Is methadone a miracle, a crutch, or an elaborate holding pattern? Is progress measured in fewer funerals, or in true freedom from chemical need? For every success story, someone holding down a job, rebuilding a family, showing up every day, there's someone who feels trapped, spinning on the world's least fun merry-go-round, wondering when real freedom will arrive. In the end, curing addiction turns out to be less about magic bullets and more about daily choices, routines, and quiet acts of survival. Methadone, for all its promise and controversy, is just one more imperfect solution in the long, winding saga of human stubbornness and hope. Methadone promises stability, but the list of side effects reads like the world's bleakest lottery. Nodding off in line? Check. Newfound appreciation for prune juice? Double check. The real fun? Trading heroin's chaos for methadone's monotony. Let's face it, every miracle drug comes with a price tag, and methadone's price isn't always paid in dollars. Instead, it's tallied up in long, sleepy afternoons, awkward conversations about bowel movements, and the occasional bout of staring into the middle distance and questioning your life choices. Methadone is, at its core, a chemical that wants you to sit down, slow down, and reflect, mostly because you're too tired to do anything else. First, there's the legendary drowsiness. Imagine you're standing in the clinic line at 8 a.m., trying to look alert while your brain is somewhere between REM sleep and existential limbo. Heads nod. Coffee cups tremble. Someone in the corner is snoring into their paperwork. For a medication designed to stabilize, methadone is surprisingly good at rendering the entire waiting room into a real-life still life. People frozen mid-thought, half dreaming about their next meal or just a slightly softer chair. But drowsiness is only the opening act. Next comes constipation, which, let's be honest, never gets the glamour treatment in addiction documentaries. It's the kind of side effect that sneaks up on you after a few days, then decides to stick around for a season or two. If you've never pondered the fiber content of every food group or developed strong opinions about dried fruit, you're about to become an expert. Grocery lists shift. Prune juice becomes the drink of champions, and you may catch yourself swapping recipes in the clinic parking lot. Have you tried the high-fiber oatmeal with flaxseed? Works wonders. No one warns you that part of recovery is reading the back of cereal boxes like they contain the meaning of life. As the days pile up, sometimes in more ways than one, the routines settle in. Methadone offers a steady baseline, but it also wraps your world in a gentle, relentless predictability. There are no wild highs, no chaotic lows, just the slow, careful repetition of mornings at the clinic, afternoons at work, and evenings that all start to blur together. The adrenaline rush of street life fades, replaced by something a little more comfortable but a lot less cinematic. Exciting becomes a word reserved for surprise visits from the state inspector, or the day they bring in new chairs for the waiting room. Yet, alongside the physical and logistical quirks, there's a stranger side effect: existential dread. It sneaks in during the quiet moments, those rare evenings when you've met every obligation and suddenly realize you have time to think. What now? Am I just trading one dependency for another? Will I ever be free, or just exchanging the drama of crisis for the numbing hum of routine? Some call it boredom, others call it progress, and a few quietly wish they could go back to not having time to ask these questions. The mental tug-of-war is real. On paper, stability is everything you've ever wanted. In reality, stability comes with its own strange anxieties. The future stretches out, unspooled and manageable, but also slightly anticlimactic. You wonder if everyone else feels this way, or if it's just you and the guy who always reads philosophy books in the clinic line. You find out quickly, it's all of you. Yet for all the oddities, most people accept these trade-offs. They're preferable to the chaos of withdrawal, or the daily panic of finding a fix. Constipation is annoying, but it doesn't steal your shoes. Drowsiness is a drag, but it doesn't come with handcuffs. Existential dread is, well, existential, but it's easier to face when you're not also worrying about where you'll sleep tonight. So you take your cup, manage the side effects, and get on with the day. In the world of addiction recovery, even monotony can be a sign of victory. One small, sleepy, slightly constipated victory at a time. Soon questions swirl around pregnant women and newborns. Is methadone safer than heroin during pregnancy, or just the lesser evil? Hospitals scramble, politicians panic, and everyone suddenly pretends to have a medical degree. It's one of the most polarizing topics in addiction medicine, And not because the science is unclear, but because the emotions are overwhelming. Pregnancy already comes loaded with judgment, unsolicited advice, and anxiety-inducing checklists. Now add methadone to the mix, and suddenly that prenatal appointment feels like a courtroom. The jury, society, the sentence varies wildly by zip code. Here's what the research actually says. Methadone is safer than untreated opioid use during pregnancy. Much safer. It helps stabilize the mother, prevents fetal stress caused by withdrawal, and increases the odds of prenatal care. But once the word methadone enters the chart, nuance goes out the window and panic sets in. Doctors shift in their chairs. Nurses whisper. Administrators worry about liability. And everyone starts preparing for a very complicated birth plan that includes legal disclaimers. Hospitals begin assigning special observation labels to newborns born to methadone patients. The dreaded acronym NAS, Neonatal Abstinence Syndrome, gets scribbled in bold on nursery whiteboards. NAS can mean anything from irritability and poor feeding to full-blown tremors and weeks in the NICU. But here's the thing. NAS isn't exclusive to methadone. It's a symptom of withdrawal from any opioid. The difference? Methadone patients are usually already in treatment, stable, compliant, doing everything right. And still, they're met with skepticism. Some hospitals automatically call social services when a baby tests positive for methadone, even if the mother followed every medical instruction to the letter. Imagine completing a 9-month marathon of compliance, sobriety, and early morning clinic visits, only to have your parenting questioned before your epidural wears off. Outside the hospital walls, the judgment intensifies. News stories frame methadone treatment during pregnancy as a controversy rather than a medical protocol. Politicians weigh in with zero clinical background, demanding more oversight, more urine tests, and more punitive measures. Meanwhile, OB/GYNs field phone calls from anxious grandparents-to-be who read somewhere that methadone babies come out addicted. Spoiler, babies can't be addicted. They can experience withdrawal, but addiction involves complex behaviors, craving, compulsion, use despite harm. Newborns do not pawn your TV for gas money, but that doesn't stop the misinformation from spreading faster than a baby shower invite. Then there's the emotional toll on the mothers themselves. Pregnant patients on methadone often carry more than just physical weight. They carry shame. They arrive at appointments already rehearsing their defences. They avoid birthing classes, skip support groups, and pray for a nurse who's seen this before and doesn't look at them like a liability. Some go off the grid, terrified that even talking about methadone might trigger a custody battle. And yet, through all this, they persist, they show up, they take their dose, they attend prenatal appointments, they pack hospital bags with onesies and clinic paperwork just in case. They do the work, quietly, stubbornly, without the applause given to those with easier stories. In recent years, some progress has emerged. Hospitals have begun developing trauma-informed policies. Some states now offer legal protections for mothers in medication-assisted treatment. A few brave OB/GYNs post educational TikToks to counter the misinformation. But the stigma still lingers, less obvious, more insidious. Because society still struggles with the idea that two things can be true at once, that someone can be healing and pregnant, responsible and on methadone, a good parent with a complicated past, the kind of contradictions that don't fit neatly into headlines or campaign speeches. So the debate continues, swirling through hospitals, legislatures and living rooms. But behind all the noise is a simple truth. Methadone doesn't disqualify someone from being a mother. It just means she's already fighting for her child every single day. And sometimes, love looks like a cup of orange liquid and a name still on the list. If you thought getting clean was hard, try filling out the paperwork. Methadone clinics evolve into paperwork fortresses, complete with urine tests, roll calls, and enough forms to make Kafka weep. You don't just fight addiction, you battle the DMV of medicine. Let's begin at the front desk, where the first rule of recovery is bring your ID, a pen, and the patience of a medieval monk. The woman behind the glass asks for your name, date of birth, insurance card, proof of address, signature, and, for good measure, the answer to a security question you didn't even know you'd set. Every interaction is documented. If you breathe too loudly, someone might write it down on a yellow carbon copy. Step 2. The paperwork. The clipboard stacked taller than your self-esteem. New patient forms, consent forms, release of information forms, forms for things you've never heard of, HIPAA, PHQ-9, and of course, the acknowledgement of the acknowledgement. There's always a line for other, and you always have to fill it in. You feel like you're auditioning for a role in a medical drama, except the only diagnosis is bureaucratic fatigue. Next up, roll call, which sounds like kindergarten but feels more like probation. The nurse calls your name, you shuffle forward, and she checks your attendance on a spreadsheet with more columns than a tax return. Miss 3 days in a row, and you get a warning. Miss a week, and you're back to square one, paperwork and all. Methadone recovery is a game of compliance, play by the rules, or risk starting over. Then there's the urine test. The golden chalice of clinic life. Once a week, maybe twice. You're handed a plastic cup and sent off to the bathroom under the not-so-watchful eye of a staff member whose main job is making awkward small talk. No, you can't just say you're clean. You have to prove it, repeatedly, in a process so intimate it could ruin first dates forever. The results are filed, discussed, and if necessary, used to launch a whole new avalanche of forms. And don't forget about the progress reports. Every few weeks, you'll meet with your assigned counsellor, who will assess your progress according to a checklist that looks suspiciously like a standardised test. Have you maintained employment? Any legal trouble? How's your mood on a scale of 1 to 10? Each answer feeds another form, which feeds another file, which is then stored in a cabinet somewhere between potential success story and cautionary tale. Privacy? There's an entire federal law about it. But in practice, your story lives in a dozen manila folders, passed around by staff who could probably recite your history better than your own family. Need a change to your dose? Fill out a request? Need to travel? There's a form for that. Want to switch clinics? Hope you like paperwork again. Outside, friends and family imagine recovery as a dramatic, cinematic moment. A person facing their demons, conquering old habits, rising from the ashes. Inside the clinic, it's more like an endless montage of waiting, signing, peeing and apologising for the one time you lost your ID. The staff are part therapist, part social worker, part warden, armed with a binder and a ballpoint pen. The real villain isn't the substance, it's the signature you forgot on page 6. Still, some patients come to love the order. In a world where chaos once ruled, the rules offer safety. The routine becomes its own form of healing. Each box ticked and document filed a tiny act of progress. Others, though, just count the days until they can escape the bureaucracy, one successful form submission at a time. So yes, methadone may have saved your life, but first, you'll have to spell your last name correctly on 3 separate forms, explain your entire existence, and survive a system built for order, not empathy. Recovery, American style, part therapy, part obstacle course, and just a dash of government-grade confusion. If television taught us anything, it's that methadone is both a miracle and a punchline. From gritty dramas to daytime talk shows, the methadone patient is always one missed dose away from disaster, or a truly unflattering subplot. Let's start in the golden age of TV drama, where no urban hospital or cop show was complete without a scene involving someone clutching a methadone cup, eyes darting, sweat beading, a dramatic orchestral swell lurking in the background. Writers loved methadone for its ready-made symbolism, a legal drug for illegal cravings, a compromise that's always one plot twist away from collapse. On screen, methadone clinics are painted in grayscale, always rainy, with lines of people in hooded jackets. Never mind that real clinics often look more like a DMV on a Tuesday. If you ever found yourself watching an 80s or 90s soap opera, you might remember the very special episode where someone's secret methadone use is exposed during Thanksgiving dinner. The room freezes. The camera zooms in on the cup. Grandma faints. Someone says, "How could you?" And the next 20 minutes are a whirlwind of accusations, sobbing, and of course an ad break for headache medicine. Daytime talk shows, America's unofficial school of health and judgment, took a particular interest. Methadone was paraded out as Exhibit A in debates about personal responsibility, usually accompanied by a blurry before and after photo, and a very stern expert who explained that methadone is just as bad as heroin. The studio audience clutches their pearls. Nobody mentions that those same experts probably take something for their bad backs every night. Even comedies get in on the act. The methadone patient is played for laughs, always late, always tired, always just a little bit tragic. The jokes land easy, "Don't talk to me before I've had my methadone," and the studio audience obliges with canned laughter. It's a punchline that's supposed to be harmless, but it lingers. Every time someone needs a tragic backstory, methadone is there, waiting quietly off stage with a paper cup and 1,000 misunderstandings. Movies love an addict's redemption arc, and methadone gets the dubious honour of being both saviour and obstacle. The main character will inevitably be shown standing in line, brooding, weighed down by the chains of daily dosing. The moral of the story? That dependency, even the legal kind, is a narrative dead end. If the character wants a happy ending, they have to quit methadone too, preferably in a single sweaty montage that takes about 3 minutes of screen time. But beyond the scripts and headlines, real-life patients watch with a mixture of annoyance and resignation. They see themselves turned into stereotypes, their lives compressed into cautionary tales or bleak punchlines. It's hard to explain to your cousin at Thanksgiving that you're not a character on a cop show. You're just trying to get through the day, raise your kids, go to work, and maybe make it to your next appointment without being recognised by the extras in line. The stigma, fueled by TV and talk radio, seeps into everyday life. Employers hesitate, friends disappear, even well-meaning neighbours start asking pointed questions about how long you'll be on that stuff. Nobody writes stories about the small victories, the parents reunited with their kids, the jobs kept, the music played, the 1,000 ordinary moments that never make it to prime time. Still, a new generation of creators is beginning to tell different stories, ones with nuance, empathy, and even hope. They're swapping dramatic music for honest conversation, stereotypes for lived experience, and subplots for actual people. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Until then, the next time you see a methadone storyline on TV, remember, behind every cup is a human, not a punchline. And sometimes, the bravest thing anyone does is just show up, on screen, and off. Where there's a will, there's a workaround. Methadone finds its way onto the street, traded, diluted, and repackaged by a cast of characters who skipped the use as directed section. Addiction is a business, and business is good. Step into any city corner where the clinic crowd and the street crowd overlap, and you'll find methadone's unofficial second life. Sure, the medication is supposed to be doled out in perfectly measured supervised doses, monitored with all the ceremony of a royal tasting. But the human brain is nothing if not creative. Someone gets a take-home bottle for good behaviour. Someone else knows a cousin with a prescription. Suddenly, that government-issued cup of stability becomes the hottest new currency, swapped for cigarettes, cash, groceries, or even just a solid favour. A black market blooms, as inevitable as weeds after rain. Some folks are hustling to get a little extra for the bad days, stashing bottles under mattresses or in hollowed-out encyclopedias. Remember books. Others are simply trying to detox themselves at home. No judgmental paperwork, no roll calls, just a DIY taper plan and a lot of wishful thinking. For a certain kind of person, the rules are always meant to be bent, stretched, or just outright ignored. The business of diversion operates on simple math. What's scarce is valuable, and stability, true, hard-earned, I don't wake up sick stability, is always in demand. Those who can't or won't make it to the clinic find their way to a friend's couch, a parking lot, or a well-worn alley. A few bills change hands, or maybe just a handshake. No receipts, no questions. If you want to see capitalism in its purest, slightly stickiest form, hang around outside a clinic on a busy morning. Of course, with any underground economy comes innovation. People cut their doses, mix with other substances, or sometimes water the medicine down to stretch it further. The old methadone orange gets a reputation on the street. Strong, predictable, and just dangerous enough to remind you that this is still a controlled substance. Street wisdom is passed along in whispers and half-truths. Don't take too much. Don't mix it with this. Always start slow. Every community has its local expert, a self-appointed pharmacist whose only diploma is years of survival and a slightly battered reputation. DIY detox. It sounds appealing. After all, who wants to navigate the labyrinth of clinic rules or explain to their boss why they're always running late on Wednesdays? People try to step themselves down, little by little, usually with mixed results. Some make it. Most find that methadone's long, sticky half-life makes quitting at home about as easy as wrestling a jellyfish in a bathtub. You can try, just don't be surprised when it slips away from you at the last minute. Meanwhile, clinics and regulators chase the problem in circles. More rules, more paperwork, tighter controls on take-home bottles. Every new safeguard creates a new loophole, and every new loophole becomes the next side hustle. Staff members become part-time detectives, tracking missing doses and asking awkward questions. Lost your take-home bottle again? Sure you did. It's bureaucracy versus ingenuity, and as always, ingenuity finds a way. In the media, methadone on the street becomes another scare headline. Legal drugs flood black market. Politicians wring their hands and promise action. In reality, most street-traded methadone isn't about getting high. It's about avoiding withdrawal, keeping the worst of the sickness at bay until tomorrow. It's the old dance of desperation and supply, played out in fluorescent light and shadowed alleys alike. So the black market blooms, not out of malice, but out of need, stubbornness, and the unyielding economics of addiction. Methadone's journey is never a straight line. Sometimes it runs in circles, always searching for the balance between help, hope, and human improvisation. As methadone clinics spread, communities split. Is this harm reduction, or just a new form of control? Neighbourhood associations meet, yard signs sprout, and city council meetings become the hottest show in town. Let's step out of the clinic line and into the fluorescent-lit world of community debate, where the only thing more potent than methadone is a microphone at public comment. Methadone clinics, once quietly tucked into urban corners, are suddenly on everyone's radar. Some people see them as a lifeline, a chance to save neighbours, stabilise families, and bring some order to the storm of addiction. Others, well, not so much. The debate starts small. A few concerned citizens, a handful of rumours. "Isn't that where the addicts go?" whispers one neighbour, clutching her reusable shopping bag a little tighter. "Will property values drop?" wonders another, calculating Zillow estimates in real time. Before long, the street is lined with signs. "Say no to methadone. protect our neighbourhood, save the children, whatever that means. For every sign in a yard, there's a story behind a door, someone's uncle, sister or kid who might need that clinic more than they'll ever admit. City council meetings, normally a sleepy affair where people debate the merits of dog parks and recycling bins, become sold-out events. Everyone has an opinion, and no one has a shortage of passion. The pro-clinic side comes armed with research, personal stories, and just enough acronyms to sound official. Evidence shows harm reduction saves lives. MAT works. The opposition counters with vivid tales of discarded needles, traffic congestion, and the ever-present fear of those people ruining the block. If you're lucky, you get a council person who's actually read the research and tries to thread the needle between public health and public panic. More often, you get speeches that sound like a very dramatic episode of a daytime courtroom show. The word epidemic is used a lot, as is personal responsibility, community safety, and occasionally what about the children? Even the local newspaper gets in on the action, running dueling op-eds that make it sound like methadone clinics are either the second coming or the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, sometimes both, in the same issue. Behind the scenes, the people who use the clinic quietly wonder when their lives became so controversial. They try to keep their heads down, avoid the news, and hope that next week's appointment won't come with a crowd of protesters snapping photos for social media. Some stop coming altogether, worried about being recognised by a neighbour or a co-worker's cousin. Stigma, it turns out, thrives on controversy, yet for every protest there's quiet progress. Families are reunited, overdoses drop, crime, at least the kind related to desperate addiction, starts to wane. The victories don't always make the headlines, but they're real. Harm reduction isn't glamorous, but it's measurable. Fewer funerals, fewer emergencies, more mornings that start with hope instead of chaos. Still, the arguments go on. Is a clinic a beacon of compassion or a bureaucratic band-aid? Does it empower people to reclaim their lives or just shuffle the problem out of sight? The truth, as always, lives in the messy middle. The most effective harm reduction is invisible, quiet, consistent, and unremarkable enough to be taken for granted. But in a world hungry for quick fixes and clear villains, nuance rarely gets top billing. So the controversy continues. Town by town, vote by vote, methadone clinics become symbols of hope for some, of fear for others, of change for everyone. And through it all, the real work, the daily struggle, the quiet recoveries, the second chances, marches on, one dose at a time, whether the neighbours are cheering or jeering. Because in the end, harm reduction isn't just a public health policy, it's a choice to see humanity, even when it's inconvenient. Correctional systems discover methadone as both a tool and a headache. Suddenly the war on drugs is waged inside jailhouse walls, with a daily dose and a side of institutional paranoia. Let's take a walk down a corridor you probably hope to never see, the echoing fluorescent lit world of the county jail. Here, every minute is scheduled, every movement watched, and the line between help and punishment is thinner than the coffee in the commissary. Enter Methadone, a new player in a very old game of power, survival and paperwork. At first, the idea sounds almost humane. If addiction is everywhere on the outside, it's even more concentrated inside. Some jails realize the revolving door, arrest, withdrawal, release, relapse, repeat, is a nightmare for everyone involved. Methadone is pitched as a solution. Stabilize the population, reduce medical emergencies, maybe even lower recidivism. All you have to do is administer one carefully measured cup every single day to a carefully supervised group of inmates. What could go wrong? A lot, as it turns out. The logistics alone are enough to give any administrator a migraine. Dosing has to be timed perfectly. Security is tight. A nurse and a guard, both slightly nervous, oversee a lineup that moves with all the enthusiasm of a Monday morning DMV. Each person steps up, opens their mouth, swallows, then opens their mouth again, proof that the dose wasn't pocketed, spat, or swapped. No one trusts anyone, not even for a second. If you ever wanted to know what institutional paranoia tastes like, just try asking for a second cup. Meanwhile, the rules pile up. There are forms for every step: intake, assessment, dosing, monitoring, missed doses, and of course, disciplinary actions. One missed dose, you're out. One rule broken, no more methadone for you. It's a recovery program with the energy of a boot camp and the patience of a prison warden. Correctional officers mutter about babysitting and coddling, while medical staff quietly wish they had gone into veterinary medicine instead. On the inside, word spreads quickly. Some inmates see methadone as a lifeline, a way to avoid the agonies of cold turkey withdrawal in a concrete cell. Others see it as leverage, a privilege that can be traded, hoarded, or weaponized in the endless barter economy of the jail. A small black market emerges. Doses are coveted. Cheeking, hiding the liquid in your mouth, becomes an art form. There's always someone trying to game the system, and always someone else watching for the slip-up. And then there's the morality patrol, both inside and out, and critics rail against spending public money to give drugs to prisoners. Letters to the editor pile up. Why are we helping criminals? Why not let them suffer? Even the most progressive warden knows he's one news story away from a scandal. Policies shift with every change in leadership, sometimes ending programs overnight, leaving hundreds to face abrupt withdrawal with nothing but Tylenol and a prayer. But for all the chaos and controversy, the results are stubbornly clear. Where methadone is available, there are fewer medical emergencies, fewer fights, and when people are released, fewer overdoses in the first shaky days of freedom. For some, it's the first taste of hope in years. For others, just a new flavour of institutional routine. So the war on drugs keeps waging, inside and out. Methadone becomes a daily negotiation between punishment and mercy, discipline and second chances. In a world built on bars and boundaries, even a tiny paper cup can be a symbol of survival, and maybe, just maybe, a step towards something better, one carefully supervised swallow at a time. Can you get high on methadone? Is it just state-sponsored heroin? Why does everyone seem to know a guy who beat the system? Tonight we tackle the rumours, the legends, and the creative fiction of street wisdom. Let's begin at the source. The coffee-stained diner booth, the corner of the clinic parking lot, or the group chat at 3 a.m. Methadone, for all its science and bureaucracy, might be the most misunderstood medicine in America. Everyone seems to have a story, usually about someone else. There's always an uncle, a buddy, or the ever-mysterious guy from work who did something wild with methadone. Urban legends grow legs, start running, and soon half the town is convinced you can snort it, inject it, or turn it into a home business if you know the right kind of plastic bottle. Myth number 1, methadone gets you high, just like heroin, only legal. Reality, not so much. When used exactly as prescribed, methadone produces a steady, controlled effect in the body, a slow, gentle climb with no euphoric peak. It's engineered to take the edge off withdrawal, not launch you into the stratosphere. Of course, people will always experiment, and yes, taking way too much methadone can cause sedation, or, in rare cases, euphoria. But at the doses handed out in clinics, high is usually just a synonym for finally not in agony. Myth number 2, methadone is just state-sponsored addiction. This one is a crowd favourite at city council meetings and in the comment section of every news article about clinics. The idea is simple and catchy. If you're still taking a drug, you're not really clean. But addiction, like most things in life, is more complicated. Methadone is a tool, one that replaces the unpredictable, dangerous chaos of street drugs with something measured, monitored, and about as glamorous as a cup of cold oatmeal. You don't rob a pharmacy or pawn your shoes for a dose. You show up, check in, and get on with your day. Stability isn't the same as freedom, but it's a decent place to start. Myth number 3. Everybody knows a guy who beat the system. There's always a tale of someone who cheated the urine test, stockpiled take-home bottles, or somehow managed to turn their clinic visits into a side hustle. The truth? Systems aren't perfect, and neither are people. But clinics are filled with checks, tests, locked cabinets, and staff who have seen every trick in the book, twice. Most stories of legendary loopholes turn out to be exaggerations or occasionally wishful thinking. If your cousin claims he sold methadone to fund a trip to Vegas, ask to see the receipts. Myth number 4. Methadone rots your bones/teeth/soul. There are countless medical rumours about methadone. The reality is, any long-term medication has side effects, but the most dramatic claims, it makes your teeth fall out, are more folklore than fact. Dental problems can happen with any opioid, but regular brushing, a dentist, and a minimum wage job will do more for your molars than any urban legend. As for your soul, there's no data. Myth number 5. You can quit methadone anytime you want. On paper, sure. In reality, tapering off methadone is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time, support, and patience. The withdrawal isn't as dramatic as heroin, but it's persistent, like that one neighbour who always asks about your lawn. Most people need a plan, a team, and a calendar, not just willpower and a YouTube video. So next time you hear a methadone myth, take it with a grain of salt and maybe a little skepticism. Real life isn't a soap opera or a street corner confessional. The truth about methadone? It's boring, bureaucratic, and full of rules. But for millions, boring beats chaos every single time. And that's the real legend worth believing. Reaganomics, Just Say No, and rising HIV rates converge. Methadone rides a political rollercoaster, vilified, embraced, then regulated to within an inch of its molecular life. Everyone has an opinion. No one has the same facts. Let's set the scene. It's the 1980s, and everything is loud: fashion, politics, and the national conversation about drugs. On TV, Nancy Reagan gazes solemnly into the camera, encouraging America's youth to just say no. Politicians on both sides of the aisle discover that nothing boosts approval ratings quite like vowing to get tough on drugs, and suddenly, policy decisions are happening at the same dizzy speed as a synth-pop drum beat. In this climate, methadone finds itself caught in a tug-of-war. One minute it's a lifeline for people struggling with heroin addiction. The next it's a symbol of government failure and social decay. Headlines flip-flop. Methadone. Miracle treatment or legalized dope? Talk show hosts shout. Everyone agrees addiction is a problem. No one agrees on the solution. And then, quietly at first, the HIV/AIDS crisis begins to unfurl its shadow across America. Needle sharing, long a silent partner in the opioid epidemic, suddenly becomes a public health catastrophe. Rates of HIV and hepatitis skyrocket in communities already battered by drugs and poverty. Health officials scramble for solutions, and methadone is thrust into the spotlight, not just as a tool for addiction treatment, but as a potential firewall against disease. But nothing in the 1980s comes without a layer of bureaucracy and controversy. New regulations multiply like aerobics VHS tapes. Clinics must track every dose, test every patient, and prove, through mountains of paperwork, that no one is diverting methadone to the street. Lines get longer, rules get stricter. Some clinics quietly close, unable to keep up with the regulatory onslaught. Others keep calm and carry on, hiring more staff just to handle the paperwork avalanche. If you ever dreamed of a career in filing, this is your era. Meanwhile, patients find themselves squeezed between moral panic and medical necessity. Want to stay on methadone? Pass your drug tests, attend your counselling sessions, check in with 3 different departments, and never ever miss an appointment. Some clinics introduce take-home doses for the most stable patients, but only after enough forms to wallpaper a small office. If you're not a model patient, one slip can set you back months. In public, the debate rages on. School boards debate whether to mention methadone in health class. Neighbourhood associations fight tooth and nail against new clinics, armed with dubious statistics and an arsenal of yard signs. And through it all, the people who actually need treatment are left navigating a system that often seems designed to wear them down. The 1990s bring their own brand of policy whiplash. As HIV infection rates force a reluctant change in perspective, harm reduction moves from fringe idea to begrudging necessity. Needle exchanges, once taboo, start to appear in some cities. Public health officials, many of whom grew up on Just Say No, are forced to learn a new language of risk reduction and evidence-based care. It's not a smooth transition, yet for all the chaos, the pendulum slowly swings toward pragmatism. Methadone, battered and controversial, survives. Clinics remain, staffed by a new generation of doctors and counsellors who've seen enough to know that slogans and shame are not effective medicine. In their hands, treatment becomes less about moral purity and more about keeping people alive day by day, dose by dose. So the political rollercoaster lurches on. One day, methadone is the villain. The next, it's the unsung hero. The only constant, real people, caught in the middle, trying to hold on to hope while the world spins around them, louder, stranger, and somehow just as complicated as ever. Who stands in the clinic line? A grandmother, a construction worker, a college kid who made one wrong turn. Their stories are as different as their shoes, and every one of them is waiting for something more than just a cup of medicine. Step into the clinic line on any given morning, and you'll see what might be the world's most eclectic roll call. There's Marvin, 72, who never misses a Tuesday and wears the same navy windbreaker year-round, no matter the forecast. Marvin spent most of his adult life as a city bus driver, learned all the shortcuts, and is famous in the waiting room for his completely useless trivia about 1970s TV. He's here because after retirement, back pain led to pills, pills led to heroin, and heroin led eventually to this well-worn spot in the line. I used to keep the city running, he'll say. Now I keep my grandkids fed and my pain in check. He's not a cautionary tale. He's just a grandfather trying to stick around a little longer. Next is Jasmine, a construction worker with calloused hands and a hard hat hooked to her backpack. Her co-workers think she's just not a morning person, but in truth, she's been up since 4, making it to the clinic before her shift. Jasmine started using opioids after an injury on the job. Too much lifting, too little safety gear. The pills ran out, the pain didn't. Methadone isn't glamorous, but it means she can work, pay rent, and keep her name on the schedule. Her story isn't one of rock bottom and dramatic redemption. It's just the reality of trying to stay afloat in a world that expects you to lift the unliftable. A few steps behind her is Owen, a college student who took a detour through addiction after a sports injury. He's young, hopeful, and awkwardly overdressed, clutching a textbook about the physiology of addiction, as if it might offer a cheat code for his own life. For Owen, methadone is a lifeline, and a lesson in humility. He's learned to stand in line without judgment, to nod hello to people he never would have met if things had gone according to plan. Every now and then, he'll look around, realise he's not alone, and let himself hope that getting better is possible, even if it doesn't look like the movies. The stories pile up as the line inches forward. There's Tasha, a single mom who brings her daughter, colouring book in hand. There's Raoul, who used to tour with a rock band and now gives guitar lessons out of his apartment. There's Linda, who hasn't told her parents she's in treatment but always brings donuts for the staff. The faces change, but the thread is the same. Nobody's here for fun, and nobody's life fits the stereotype. The line is its own kind of support group, silent, mostly, but quietly reassuring. Small talk fills the gaps between roll call and dosing. People swap childcare tips, job leads, and the occasional homemade snack. No one asks what brought you here, but everyone understands what keeps you coming back, the hope for another ordinary day. If you listen closely, you hear the heartbeat of real recovery, slow, stubborn, messy, and shared. For every headline about methadone zombies, there are 1,000 unseen moments of resilience. A grandmother walking her grandson to school, a builder finishing her shift, a student making it to class. These are the real faces of the methadone generation, each one living proof that hope doesn't look the same for everyone, but it does, stubbornly, keep showing up in the line. It's the 1990s and suddenly every OB/GYN has a pamphlet about methadone. The debate about treating pregnant people with opioids goes public, and the only thing more heated than the medical opinions are the family courtrooms. Let's begin in the fluorescent glow of a prenatal clinic where doctors once quietly avoided any conversation involving methadone, addiction, or anything that couldn't be charted in a pastel-coloured growth tracker. Now, things have changed. The waiting room holds more than just swollen ankles and baby names. It holds tension, confusion, and the quiet anxiety of being judged by a system that only recently acknowledged that addicted mothers are still mothers. Methadone and pregnancy, two words that, when spoken together in the 90s, caused an entire nation to lose its composure. On one side, you had addiction specialists waving studies and shouting from under a pile of clinical data. Stability helps the fetus. Withdrawal is worse than maintenance. On the other side, politicians, news anchors, and a very opinionated aunt from Ohio wrung their hands and asked, "But what kind of mother would take methadone while pregnant?" as if the uterus were a moral compass. In reality, the situation was far more complicated and much quieter. Many women found themselves pregnant while in recovery. For them, methadone wasn't a choice. It was the thing keeping their lives, and now a new one from unravelling. Suddenly, every sip of orange syrup came with 1,000 questions. Am I hurting my baby? Will CPS show up at the hospital? Will they take my child before I even hold them? Medical advice, predictably, varied wildly. Some doctors read the latest studies and calmly explain that methadone was the safest course for pregnant patients already on maintenance. Others gave vague shrugs and stern warnings, or worse, refused treatment altogether. Women bounced between clinics, OB/GYNs, and family courts, trying to piece together a healthcare plan using duct tape, hope, and maybe a sympathetic nurse or two. And then there were the courts. Family courtrooms across the country lit up with methadone cases, where judges with zero medical training suddenly held the power to decide whether a woman was fit to parent based on the presence of a legally prescribed medication. Caseworkers made recommendations based on policy memos, not context. Some mothers were praised for seeking help. Others were told that even being on methadone meant they weren't truly clean. It was a legal coin toss with a baby at the centre. Hospitals, too, had their own policies. Some required supervised births. Others placed newborns in the NICU automatically, regardless of symptoms. The dreaded acronym NAS, or Neonatal Abstinence Syndrome, floated through delivery rooms like a ghost. If a baby cried too much, blinked too slowly, or just looked a little fussy, out came the clipboard. No one seemed to agree on whether methadone exposure was treatment or trauma. But amid the confusion, something else emerged: resilience. women began organising. Support groups formed in church basements and clinic parking lots. Pamphlets were rewritten, not with scare tactics, but with real guidance. Advocates pushed for policy changes, for evidence-based treatment plans, for birth plans that didn't end in separation and grief. By the late 90s, the message started to shift. Methadone during pregnancy wasn't perfect, but it was better than withdrawal, better than chaos, better than pretending the problem didn't exist. A new generation of doctors stepped in, armed with compassion and charts. Slowly, cautiously, the system began to recognize that pregnant people in recovery weren't the problem, they were part of the solution. Still, the stigma lingers, it always does. But so do the mothers, strong, exhausted, and holding babies wrapped in hope and second chances. They line up at clinics with diaper bags over one shoulder and courage in their hands, and every dose they take is not a sign of failure, but of fierce, quiet survival. Heroin moves to the suburbs, and so does methadone. PTA meetings, cul-de-sac drama, and methadone clinics next to strip malls. The only thing scarier than teenage rebellion is a zoning dispute. At first, nobody notices. The suburbs, long thought immune to the grit and grind of addiction, carry on with their lawn care and soccer practices. But beneath the surface, between the minivans and mulch deliveries, something is shifting. Prescription opioids, once handed out like tic-tacs for wisdom teeth and sore backs, have quietly opened the door. And when those run out, heroin walks in like an uninvited dinner guest who never leaves. By the early 2000s, suburban ERs are seeing overdoses from people with pastel kitchens and good dental plans. Teens in Letterman jackets, mums in yoga pants, dads who once coached Little League, all showing up with the same story. It started with pain pills. Methadone, once reserved for the urban poor, is now being whispered about at book clubs, and whispered even louder at school board meetings. That's when the zoning meetings start. Suddenly neighbourhoods with names like Willow Creek Estates and Maple Hill Preserve are in a panic. Word spreads that a methadone clinic is being proposed near the shopping centre 2 blocks from the elementary school, 5 from the dog park. Flyers appear in mailboxes. Facebook groups explode with caps-locked concern. Do we really want those people in our community? Someone posts beneath a picture of a perfect hedge. Never mind that those people already live here. They just haven't said anything. At the city planning meetings, everyone has an opinion. Some come armed with data and a sense of moral clarity. This is healthcare. We treat cancer in the suburbs. Why not addiction? Others bring only fear, folded arms, and phrases like it's bad for property values and think of the children. The real kicker. Many of the loudest voices have no idea what methadone is or who takes it. They've seen a documentary once. It didn't end well. Meanwhile, the people who need the clinic the most try to stay invisible. Claire, a single mum and substitute teacher, drives 45 minutes every morning to the next town over just to get her dose, hoping no one recognises her in the waiting room. Mark, a 19-year-old community college student, tells his friends he's going to the gym when he's really heading to treatment. He wears his hoodie up and his shame tucked in. Eventually the clinic's approved, usually. Sometimes with conditions like more fencing or discreet signage. Sometimes after years of legal ping-pong. And when it finally opens, something incredible happens. Nothing. No spike in crime. No parade of chaos. Just people showing up, quietly, taking their medicine, and going to work, class, or, yes, even the PTA meeting. In time, the stigma softens. A neighbour mentions she's in recovery. A dad speaks up at back-to-school night. A local paper runs a profile on someone who got their life back. It's not dramatic. It's not fast. But it happens. And still, there's tension. The suburbs weren't designed for this kind of reality check. Methadone isn't part of the dream of manicured lawns and granite countertops. but now it's parked in the plaza between the dry cleaner and the frozen yogurt shop, and maybe that's exactly where it belongs. Because addiction doesn't care about zip codes. It doesn't ask how nice your house is or how many coupons you clipped. And recovery? It needs room to exist everywhere, not just in places that look like a movie set for suffering. So methadone moves in slowly, one strip mall at a time, and in the space between judgment and understanding, a new kind of suburb begins to grow, one where hope shares a parking lot with frozen yogurt, and nobody flinches when you say the word clinic. America's solution becomes an export. Methadone shows up in Europe, Asia, and everywhere governments are tired of losing to heroin. Results may vary. Side effects include international confusion and policy debates in 5 languages. Methadone, born in a Nazi lab and bureaucratized in an American clinic, takes its passport photo sometime in the late 20th century. Global health organizations, embassies, and doctors with large briefcases begin discussing the methadone model as a kind of policy starter kit. Just add water, stir in regulation, and wait for the overdoses to drop. For countries watching addiction numbers spiral, the idea is tempting. Stable, cheap, effective-ish. What's not to love? Let's begin in Europe, where responses range from yes, let's build 300 clinics by Thursday to what on earth is that? The UK, ever the pragmatist, adopts methadone into its National Health Service, with that particular British mixture of politeness and quiet despair. Of course, we'll treat addiction, they say, pouring orange syrup into a paper cup. We're not animals. In Switzerland, things get more interesting. After watching their heroin crisis balloon in the 1980s and 90s, the Swiss government decides to go full-on experimental. Not only do they embrace methadone, they pilot heroin-assisted treatment. Yes, you read that right. In a country better known for banking and neutrality, officials start handing out actual pharmaceutical-grade heroin under medical supervision. The idea? If people can't stop using, at least let them do it safely, quietly, and without dying in a public restroom. Critics gasp. The results, weirdly enough, are kind of impressive. Meanwhile, in France, methadone enters the scene late, slowly and cautiously, like someone eyeing a very complicated dessert menu. Instead, they first embrace buprenorphine, methadone's more flexible cousin, which can be prescribed by any regular doctor. The result is a kind of national workaround. Treat addiction, but keep it away from centralized clinics. France sees a drop in deaths, but methadone still finds a place on the shelf, especially in hospital settings and prisons. Over in Eastern Europe, methadone's reception is more complicated. Countries like Russia reject it outright, declaring that recovery must be drug-free or nothing at all. Methadone to them is just another crutch, unpatriotic and suspiciously Western. This hardline stance leads to international outcry, especially from human rights groups, but the policy stands. Russia, it seems, prefers cold turkey served with extra surveillance. In Asia, things get even more eclectic. China, facing its own resurgence of heroin use, launches a massive methadone clinic program in the early 2000s. The scale is dizzying. Hundreds of clinics, thousands of patients. It's public health with an authoritarian twist. Take your dose, follow the rules, and don't ask too many questions. Meanwhile, Vietnam and Malaysia begin rolling out methadone programs with support from the UN and international NGOs, often blending Western models with local customs and quietly hoping the political winds don't change. In Australia, methadone treatment is folded into the public health system with surprising efficiency. The country that gave the world surfing and Vegemite also delivers one of the more balanced methadone systems, equal parts medical rigour and compassion. Clinics operate out of pharmacies. Patients are treated like people. It's not perfect, but it works. And throughout it all, the same arguments echo across borders. Is methadone a cure or a leash, a treatment or a trap? Governments try to balance compassion with control. Patients navigate stigma and bureaucracy in every language, and somewhere in the middle, methadone quietly does what it was designed to do: keep people alive. Because heroin doesn't care about geography. It doesn't respect borders or visa rules. And so, methadone follows it, across oceans, through embassies, into clinics tucked beside mosques, metro stations and municipal buildings. The details change, the paperwork changes, the language on the signs changes, but the struggle, that stays the same. One cup at a time, one cautious success, in every corner of the map. No good treatment goes unchallenged. Enter the new kids, Suboxone and buprenorphine, promoted as safer, gentler and less stigmatizing, but somehow we're still running in circles. It starts with a familiar pattern. People notice that methadone is saving lives, but also that it comes with baggage, regulatory baggage, stigma baggage, daily clinic visit at 7 a.m. baggage. And so, the medical world begins eyeing an alternative, something with fewer strings, less drama, and ideally a better PR team. Buprenorphine enters stage left, wearing a lab coat and a friendly smile, ready to shake things up. Chemically, buprenorphine is what the scientists like to call a partial opioid agonist, which sounds like something from a villain's resume, but actually means it works without delivering the full euphoric high. It eases withdrawal and craving, but with a built-in ceiling effect, it doesn't keep going up the more you take. That means less risk of overdose and, theoretically, less potential for abuse. Even better, in 2002, the US government approved Suboxone, a combination of buprenorphine and naloxone for outpatient addiction treatment. And here's the kicker. Doctors can prescribe it from their regular offices. No clinic lines, no security guards, no early morning roll calls. Suddenly recovery is something that can happen in a cozy waiting room with a potted plant and a receptionist named Denise. Cue the excitement. Public health officials hail it as a breakthrough. Finally, they say, a medication that doesn't make patients feel like criminals. Suboxone ads start appearing in brochures, waiting rooms, and eventually late-night television. It's pitched not just as a treatment, but as a lifestyle change. Less stigma, more freedom, and a medication that doesn't require you to organize your entire life around a government-mandated dosing schedule. But, because there's always a but, things get messy. For starters, access isn't as easy as it sounds. Doctors have to apply for a special DEA waiver, known as the X license, to prescribe Suboxone, and there are limits on how many patients they can treat. The result? In many areas, especially rural ones, Suboxone is as rare as a dentist who takes walk-ins. If you do find a doctor, you might be greeted with a waiting list longer than your last breakup. Then there's the cost. Unlike methadone, which is often provided through subsidized clinics, Suboxone can be expensive, especially without insurance. People find themselves choosing between recovery and rent, or hoping their local pharmacy doesn't run out of stock again. The dream of low-barrier access turns out to be more of a paperwork maze with a copay. Also, stigma has a way of evolving. Suboxone patients quickly discover that society doesn't always make fine distinctions between legal and illegal opioids. Employers still judge. Family members still raise eyebrows. Some support groups even refuse to recognize Suboxone users as truly sober. It's methadone social baggage just in a slightly nicer suitcase. Meanwhile, a street market for Suboxone emerges. Some people sell their doses to cover bills or to help others detox on their own. Others use it to stretch time between heroin binges. Critics jump on this, warning that Suboxone is being abused, while patients just nod and mutter, "It's almost like people in pain act irrationally sometimes." And let's not forget, Suboxone doesn't work for everyone. For some, Methadone remains the better fit, more structure, stronger binding, more effective at blocking cravings. In practice, the choice between methadone and Suboxone is rarely about preference. It's about access, cost, geography, and whether the receptionist remembers your name. So here we are, with 2 medications and 1 persistent problem. Addiction still isn't simple, and treatment still isn't one size fits all. Suboxone may be newer, lighter, and easier to market, but it hasn't replaced methadone, it's joined it. 2 paths through the same tangled forest. Because in the end, it's not about which medication wins, it's about who survives long enough to make the choice. In some cities, entire neighbourhoods become known as Methadone Mile. Here, poverty, homelessness, and addiction intertwine. Politicians offer thoughts and prayers, while residents wonder if hope is covered by Medicaid. Welcome to the blocks where the system stalls out. You won't find glossy clinic brochures here or addiction centres with calming colour palettes and pastel motivational posters. Instead, you'll find cracked sidewalks, shuttered storefronts, and a long line of people wrapped in coats that never quite keep out the cold. Methadone Mile is a nickname that started off cynical and stayed that way. It's not a district so much as a symptom, a visible, unavoidable reminder of what happens when recovery is available in theory but not in practice. In places like Boston, Philadelphia, or Baltimore, these stretches of city streets are lined with clinics, shelters, halfway houses, and the people caught in between them. The air smells like exhaust, stale coffee, and resignation. On one end of the block, someone is selling loose cigarettes. On the other, someone is trying to stay awake long enough to make their dosing time. It's not just a neighbourhood, it's a purgatory with parking meters. For those who live, or hover, in these zones, methadone isn't a tool for stability. It's a survival mechanism. You wake up on a park bench or a mat in a shelter, figure out if you can scrape together enough bus fare or beg your way to the clinic, and hope your name hasn't mysteriously vanished from the dosing list. Miss your dose, and you're not just uncomfortable. You're sick, sweating, shaking, panicked. So you wait, in line, in the rain, in pain. Clinics here are overwhelmed, underfunded, and often more like processing centres than treatment facilities. Case managers juggle impossible caseloads. Bathrooms stay locked. Security guards memorise names, faces, and troublemakers. Some clinics open as early as 5 a.m, but the line starts forming at 4:30. If you're not there in time, you might miss your window, and that means withdrawal by lunchtime. These are the places where the failings of multiple systems stack on top of each other. Addiction, yes, but also housing, mental health, healthcare, employment, transportation. People who show up for methadone are often managing 4 or 5 crises before they even get to the front of the line. And the clinics, for all their efforts, are not equipped to solve structural poverty with orange syrup and a clipboard. It's easy to point fingers. Some blame the patients, some blame the clinics, some blame the neighbourhood as if asphalt and buildings have agency. Meanwhile, politicians show up for photo ops, tour the block with furrowed brows, and propose plans with very serious names like Recovery Corridor Revitalisation Task Force. Then they leave. The street stays the same, and yet, within this grind, there's resilience. There's Cheryl, who walks an hour every morning from her shelter just to make it to the clinic. There's Mike, who brings sandwiches to people waiting in line. There's a woman named Deb who always has spare socks and reminds newcomers to drink water. Because even when the system forgets people, they don't forget each other. The real tragedy of Methadone Mile isn't that people are there, it's that they're stuck there. That the system delivers just enough to keep people alive, but not enough to help them move forward. There's no exit sign, no off-ramp, just another day, another line, another dose. So yes, methadone saves lives, but in these neighbourhoods it's not a cure, it's a holding pattern, a band-aid on a broken bone. And unless the world decides that the people here are worth more than the headlines they generate, the mile will stretch on. One dose at a time, one forgotten person at a time, one more chance to wonder how hope survives when it's forced to live on the sidewalk. You've survived heroin, the clinic, and the paperwork. Now you want off methadone. Turns out quitting is like trying to leave a timeshare. You can check out any time you like, but you can never really leave. Let's be clear. Getting on methadone is no small feat. It takes commitment, daily effort, and the patience to navigate more red tape than a tax accountant in April. But getting off methadone, that's a whole different journey, slower, lonelier, and full of the kind of existential questions that make you want to lie down and never get back up. It starts with a conversation. Maybe you've been stable for years. You have a job, an apartment, a therapist who's not half bad. The chaos is gone, replaced by a life with working appliances and recurring grocery lists. You bring it up with your counsellor. I think I'm ready to taper. They nod slowly, like someone who's heard that before. Because everyone says it at some point. Not everyone follows through. Tapering sounds simple in theory. Reduce your dose gradually. Keep showing up. Monitor symptoms. Repeat. But in practice, it's like defusing a bomb using only your nervous system. Methadone clings to the body like a stubborn ghost, present in your bones, your brain chemistry, your sleep patterns. And while heroin withdrawal can feel like being hit by a truck, methadone withdrawal is more like being stuck in a slowly collapsing tent for weeks. You're uncomfortable, annoyed, mildly panicked, and no one's quite sure when it'll stop. You start with small reductions, 5 milligrams, then another 5. Each drop feels manageable until suddenly it doesn't. You notice it in the mornings first, waking up too early, sweating through the sheets, feeling like your bones are vibrating just below the skin. Your appetite disappears, your patience thins, you start to stare at light fixtures too long. Welcome to the crawl space of withdrawal. Not quite sick, not quite stable. The clinic watches closely. If you show signs of distress, they offer to pause the taper, maybe bump your dose back up. It's supportive, but it also feels like a trap. You wonder if anyone actually makes it out the other side, or if you've just signed up for an infinite loop of well-intentioned hesitation. Meanwhile, the world outside doesn't notice. Your co-workers don't know you're tapering. Your family thinks you've been better for years. Nobody celebrates dropping from 60 grams to 55 grams. There's no milestone balloon that says congrats on stabilizing your endorphin regulation. Instead, you move through the world half-strangled by an invisible process no one can see. You feel like you're quitting a job you're still showing up to every day, and then there's the fear. What happens when the dose hits 0? Who are you without the routine? The clinic gave you structure, identity, community, an odd little ecosystem of healing and bureaucracy. Letting go means flying solo, no net, no nurse, no predictable cup of orange syrup. It's a milestone, but also a goodbye to the one thing that never abandoned you. Some people never quit, and that's okay. Methadone is maintenance. For some, it's a bridge. For others, it's the road. But for those who do taper off completely, the moment is bittersweet. There's no parade, just a final dose, a signature, and the quiet walk to the parking lot with no appointment to come back to. Freedom, it turns out, is a quiet thing. It doesn't scream. It doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like waking up, stretching out, and realizing for the first time in years you don't have anywhere to be at 7 a.m. And if that's not recovery, it's close enough to count. 'Tis the 21st century. Science keeps studying, politicians keep debating, and people keep lining up. Is methadone a miracle, a menace, or just the least bad solution? Grab your coffee or methadone cup and argue quietly. The conversation around methadone has evolved. but not necessarily matured. We now live in an age where addiction science is more sophisticated than ever. Neuroimaging, pharmacogenetics, peer-reviewed meta-analyses, tools that didn't exist when methadone clinics first opened their doors. And yet, public opinion remains stuck somewhere between 1983 and a particularly judgmental church bulletin. For every researcher saying, the data is clear, there's a city council member muttering, but what if it brings those people to my neighbourhood? Science says this: methadone works. It reduces overdose deaths, lowers rates of disease transmission, helps people hold jobs, and prevents the kind of desperate chaos that defined the opioid crisis in the 90s and early 2000s. Long-term maintenance has shown to be more effective than abstinence-only programs. Even the World Health Organization endorses it. And still, in many corners of America and around the world, it remains more taboo than recreational Xanax at brunch. Why? Because methadone treatment, at its core, forces society to grapple with a deeply uncomfortable question. Are we okay with people needing a drug every day to live a better life? For some, the answer is no. They want a version of recovery that looks neat, linear, and preferably abstinent. In this model, methadone is seen not as progress, but as a failure of willpower wrapped in a pharmacy label. But others see methadone through a lens of realism. They know addiction isn't about willpower, but chemistry, trauma, and circumstance. They understand that stability is more meaningful than purity, that staying alive long enough to heal is more urgent than appeasing someone else's moral comfort. These people champion harm reduction, advocate for better access, and speak openly about recovery as a process, not a single, dramatic exit from chaos. Caught in the middle are the patients, people just trying to hold down jobs, raise kids, and not die. They listen to the noise from both sides while waiting in line, again, for their daily dose. They've read the pamphlets, they've heard the rumours, they know that if they miss 3 days in a row, they might get kicked off the programme. They also know that if they succeed in tapering off methadone, there won't be a parade, just silence, and maybe a little more judgment if they ever relapse. Meanwhile, new players enter the scene: Suboxone, buprenorphine, naltrexone. Each one is rolled out with a press release and the promise of being the next chapter in addiction care. And yet, methadone remains. Quiet, unflashy, regulated to the point of absurdity, still keeping people alive. Then there's the question of access. In some regions, clinics are plentiful and progressive. In others, they're non-existent, or so wrapped in stigma that people would rather detox in jail than show up in daylight. The US federal government has recently begun reconsidering decades-old restrictions. Some clinics now allow more flexible take-home policies, remote counselling, and less punitive structures. Others still run like clockwork from 1987, complete with plastic chairs and rules about eye contact. The truth is, there is no universal answer. Methadone is not the hero or the villain. It's a tool. For some, it's the bridge to sobriety. For others, it's the foundation of their stability. And for many, it's the only thing standing between them and a system that's never really been built to catch them in the first place. So the debate continues, online, in policy rooms, in the break rooms of overwork clinics. Is it science or control? Compassion or compromise? The answer might be all of the above, and in the meantime the line at the clinic forms again, quietly, patiently, because while the world keeps arguing, people still need help, and they don't have time to wait for consensus. What have we learned? That every cure comes with a catch, that hope, regulation and human stubbornness always make a mess, but for millions, methadone is still the difference between chaos and another chance. Now, standing at the intersection of policy, science and lived experience, we face the one question that haunts all public health efforts. What next? We've tried the war on drugs approach, billions spent, prisons full, lives lost. We've tried the abstinence-only route, white-knuckle detoxes and rehab stints fueled by motivational posters and shame. We've tried maintenance therapy, methadone, buprenorphine, even heroin-assisted treatment in places bold enough to admit that sometimes the best path to recovery isn't a straight line. Through it all, we've learned that addiction is less about substances and more about systems, broken, underfunded, and often cruel. Methadone, for all its baggage, is a survivor. It has weathered moral panic, media hysteria, and more bad headlines than a reality TV star. It's been called a crutch, a miracle, and everything in between. And yet, it endures. Why? Because it works. Not perfectly, not always elegantly, but it works in the same way that wearing a seatbelt isn't exciting but still saves lives. The future of opioid treatment, then, isn't about inventing the next shiny medication. It's about designing a system that treats people like people. That means expanding access, especially in rural and underserved areas where clinics are rare and transportation is a luxury. It means ending the 5 a.m. roll calls, the punitive urine tests, the regulations that treat patients like suspects instead of survivors. It means trusting patients to manage their own care, because newsflash, most of them already are. We also need to rethink stigma, not just in society, but in medicine itself. Too often, addiction treatment is siloed from the rest of healthcare, treated like a side project instead of a core part of public wellness. Your average doctor can prescribe morphine for back pain, but not methadone for a life-threatening addiction. That's not science, that's stigma with a medical degree. Technology has a role to play too. Telehealth exploded during the pandemic, showing us that flexibility doesn't equal chaos. Patients were able to attend counselling from their kitchens, manage prescriptions without commuting 2 hours, and, shocker, still make progress. Maybe we don't need rigid structures as much as we need responsive systems. Then there's prevention. No treatment system can thrive while new cases of opioid addiction continue to rise. That means better prescribing practices, better pain management alternatives, and serious investment in mental health, the uninvited guest at nearly every addiction story. Until we stop treating trauma with pills and loneliness with punishment, we're just playing catch-up. But here's the strange, hopeful truth. We're learning, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks and confusion and the occasional bill that makes everything worse. But we're learning, and that, in itself, is revolutionary. Because for decades, addiction was something we whispered about, punished, buried. Today we build clinics, we host support groups, we pass laws, some of them even good. We argue, yes, but we argue in public, with data, with empathy. And in that noisy, messy effort to do better, people are quietly getting their lives back. One morning at a time, one dose, one decision not to use, they're going to work, taking care of their kids, cooking dinner, planting flowers, relearning joy. So maybe the future isn't shiny, maybe it's slow, maybe it's built one person at a time, one policy change, one community choosing compassion over judgment. That's not a miracle cure. But it is a kind of healing. And sometimes, healing is just choosing to show up again tomorrow. Every generation gets the addiction movie it deserves, and Methadone's film career is as mixed as its patient reviews. Sometimes it's the silent saviour, quietly stabilising our tragic hero. Other times, it's portrayed as a chemical ball and chain, the last resort for characters who can't catch a break, even in the credits. If you ever wondered how much reality Hollywood can fit into a 9-minute plot, grab your popcorn. Methadone is about to get its close-up, unflattering lighting and all. Addiction in film has always walked a fine line between drama and disaster porn. And when methadone shows up, it usually arrives wearing a label that says plot device. Rarely is it depicted with nuance or accuracy. Instead, it's the thing a character takes after they've hit bottom, a sign that they're either on the mend or stuck in a new kind of cinematic purgatory. If Methadone had an IMDb page, its most frequent roles would be desperate character number 3 or suspicious white paper cup. In early portrayals, Methadone barely got a mention. Films loved Heroin for its cinematic punch. The highs were dramatic, the lows were devastating, and the symbolism was practically built in. Methadone, by contrast, was subtle. Too subtle. It didn't sparkle or self-destruct on screen, it just worked. And in Hollywood, functional is code for boring. Eventually, though, Methadone started getting lines. You might spot it in a gritty drama where a character checks into treatment and is handed a cup with little fanfare. Cue the montage of withdrawal, regret, and eventual redemption, often tied to the moment they decide to quit Methadone, as if recovery only counts when you've suffered enough. Bonus points if someone throws a bottle in the trash in a symbolic gesture of taking control. Then came the 2000s, and with them, the prestige addiction dramas. Methadone began showing up more frequently, usually in backstory form. He was doing great on Methadone for 6 months, a character might say. Voice hushed, eyes distant. The implication? Stability is fragile, relapse is inevitable, and Methadone, while well-meaning, is just another rung on the ladder to nowhere. Some films try harder. A few independent productions and documentaries have taken a more honest look, showing Methadone patients not as caricatures, but as people, flawed, hopeful, resilient. These portrayals are rare and rarely seen. They don't get Oscar nominations, they don't come with sweeping orchestral scores, but they tell the truth. Methadone is not a miracle cure, but it's not a monster either. It's a tool, a bridge. Sometimes it's the only thing keeping someone alive long enough to heal. Television has had its moments too. The gritty procedural might feature a methadone clinic in an episode titled Chemical Bonds or The Ties That Bind. Someone will overdose. Someone will lie about being clean. A detective will raise an eyebrow and ask, "He was on methadone?" as if that explains everything. The episode wraps up in 42 minutes, with very little learned and absolutely no follow-up in future episodes. And comedy. Methadone is a punchline there, usually used to highlight how far a character has fallen. It's referenced alongside parole officers and unpaid rent. It's never funny because it's true, it's funny because it's uncomfortable, and that says a lot. The reality, of course, is much less dramatic. In real life, methadone isn't an arc, it's a routine. It's showing up, checking in, taking your dose and trying to live another day. It's not glamorous, tragic, or particularly cinematic, but it's real. And that's the part that never quite makes it to the big screen. So next time you see methadone portrayed on film, look past the lighting and the script. Look for the human being in the frame. The one who's doing the work, even if the world and the writers don't always understand what that work really looks like. Because sometimes survival doesn't win awards. It just shows up again tomorrow. Picture this. You live in a tiny town where the local diner doubles as town hall, and the only thing in surplus is gossip. If you want methadone, you're driving hours to the nearest city, because rural America still thinks opioid crisis is something that happens to other people. Here, addiction treatment is a road trip, privacy is non-existent, and your refill reminder comes from the gas station attendant who's seen you pass by every Thursday since 1997. Welcome to the methadone desert. Not a literal sand dune in sight, but a landscape just as barren, especially when it comes to access. In rural towns stretched across the Midwest, Appalachia and the Deep South, methadone isn't unavailable because of science or medical ethics. It's unavailable because no one built the clinic, because zoning boards said no, because state regulations wrapped it in red tape and forgot to send scissors. So what does treatment look like out here? For many, it starts with an alarm clock that goes off at 3:30 a.m. You rub your eyes, splash your face and pack snacks for the 4-hour round trip to the nearest clinic. You'll be back before lunch, assuming no detours, no flat tires, and no surprise holiday schedule you didn't know about. Hope you like highway rest stops and that one weird AM radio station that only plays 80s power ballads and livestock reports. Once you arrive, it's the same routine as anywhere else. Check in, wait in line, get your dose. But the difference is what it took to get here and what's waiting back home. A job you might lose if you're late, kids who need breakfast, a neighbour who's starting to ask too many questions. Out here, everyone knows everything, but nobody says anything directly. You just feel the shift in energy when someone spots your car heading out of town every morning like clockwork. And let's talk about those neighbours. In small communities, addiction still carries a special kind of shame. The kind passed down like an heirloom, polished through generations of quiet judgment. Methadone? That's not treatment, they'll mutter, it's just a crutch. And once you're labelled, good luck shaking it. The pharmacy tech who used to greet you now just nods. The pastor includes you in his prayer list publicly. The PTA silently hopes you won't volunteer for snack duty. Clinics are rare because public opinion still sees addiction as a city problem, something that happens in alleyways, not cornfields. But heroin made its way into these towns years ago, tucked inside pill bottles, prescribed by well-meaning doctors who thought they were managing pain. And when the pills ran dry, heroin filled the gap like floodwater seeping into a basement. Quietly, completely. Local governments often oppose methadone clinics because they fear it will bring addicts into town, as if addiction hasn't already set up shop in their own neighbourhoods. They fear it will increase crime, tank property values, upset the aesthetic. So instead of building treatment infrastructure, they build distance. Literally, miles and miles of it. For people in rural areas, methadone becomes a test of endurance. It's not just about getting clean, it's about staying clean when everything, from geography to stigma to logistics, works against you. Some manage it day after day, defying the odds in the odometer. Others give up, not because they don't want recovery, but because the system made it too far, too expensive, too exhausting to reach. And so, the desert stretches on, paved roads instead of sand dunes, silos instead of palm trees, but the thirst is the same, for help, for dignity, for something closer than 100 miles away. Because healing shouldn't require a full tank of gas and a map. It should be right down the road, just like the diner, the school, and the tiny post office where everyone knows your name and hopefully, someday, your story. Where there's a regulated substance, there's always a workaround and someone willing to game the system. Enter the age of methadone entrepreneurs, doctors who run clinics like cash-only fortresses, street dealers who buy low and sell high, and a whole ecosystem of hustlers trading scripts for secrets. Addiction may be a disease, but for some, it's also a booming business. If you ever wanted to know how a life-saving drug becomes someone else's lottery ticket, buckle up. It starts with a loophole. Methadone, unlike most prescription drugs, is administered directly at specialized clinics, which are regulated heavily. But wherever regulation piles up, profit starts leaking out the sides. Clinics in high-demand areas become gold mines. Some are well-run, compassionate and patient-centered. Others? Not so much. A few operate like drugstore McDonald's, in and out, no questions, no counselling, no time, just the dose, the money, and a receipt that proves you showed up to check a box no one really cares to read. In the early 2000s, as opioid addiction skyrocketed, so did the number of for-profit methadone clinics. These weren't quiet little non-profits tucked behind hospitals. They were full-blown franchises, with slick signage and hours that catered more to volume than healing. Many operated as cash-only clinics, charging patients per dose, per visit, and sometimes per breath. Some even refused insurance altogether. Simpler that way, less paperwork, more cash, fewer questions. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a treatment model is monetized to the point of absurdity, this is it. Meanwhile, outside the clinics, a different kind of market begins to thrive. Methadone bottles, meant to be carefully administered under medical supervision, start appearing on street corners, in parking lots, tucked under car seats, and in pockets of sweatshirts that haven't been washed since last winter. Some patients sell part of their dose for extra money. Others trade it for cigarettes, groceries, or a night on someone's couch. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's just desperation. Rent is due, and the extra 10 milligrams might cover the gap between staying housed and sleeping in your cousin's garage. Then come the middlemen. Street dealers who specialize in second-hand methadone begin to pop up, acting as unofficial pharmacists with a loyal clientele. They know who needs a detox buffer, who's tapering on their own, and who's chasing a high the clinic never delivered. They set prices by strength, by flavour, by scarcity. If the local clinic tightens its take-home policies, street prices spike. If a new clinic opens nearby, discounts all around, supply and demand, addict edition. And in the background, the pill mills evolve. Some shady doctors, already handing out opioid prescriptions like Halloween candy, decide methadone might be their next side hustle. They offer consultations that last 4 minutes and always end in a dose. Staff are underpaid, undertrained, and often under investigation, and yet, the line outside never shortens. For every patient trying to rebuild their life, there's someone else looking to flip the system upside down. Not because they're evil, but because broken systems breed hustlers. If the road to recovery is blocked by red tape and policy potholes, someone will always show up with a ladder and a price tag. Eventually, regulators catch on. Laws tighten, clinics are audited, pill mill busts hit the news. But the shadow economy doesn't disappear, it just adapts. Maybe they can't get methadone, but they'll get something. Suboxone, benzos, even loperamide in bulk. Yes, the anti-diarrheal, don't ask. The hustle doesn't stop. It just changes clothes. And so, the methadone gold rush rolls on, part treatment, part transaction. For every person walking into a clinic to save their life, someone else is walking out thinking about how to sell theirs in parts. It's not a story about evil. It's a story about capitalism, pain, and what happens when survival becomes a side hustle. Methadone may stabilize the patient, but the emotional side effects radiate outward. Families learn the art of cautiously hopeful optimism. Partners juggle schedules with dosing times, and kids become experts in waiting room etiquette. Holidays, birthdays, even grocery runs, all rescheduled around a little orange bottle. If you've ever wondered what it's like to love someone on methadone, welcome to a crash course in patience, paperwork, and quietly stubborn loyalty. Loving someone in recovery isn't just a feeling, it's a logistics operation. You become the unofficial calendar keeper, the transportation coordinator, and sometimes the emotional shock absorber. You learn the difference between clinic days and take-home days. You memorize the hours of operation and know which nurse gives out take-homes with a smile and which one doesn't believe in smiling or flexibility. At first, the methadone routine brings relief. After months, maybe years of chaos, the consistency is almost soothing. There's a schedule now, a plan. You finally feel like the emergency phase is over, but then you realize the new normal is still complicated. It's hard to plan a spontaneous weekend away when your partner has to dose daily. You've cancelled brunch with friends more times than you can count because the clinic was running behind or someone forgot their ID. Family dinners turn into negotiations. Can we do it after 5:30, once I've picked up her dose? Holidays involve strategic planning. We'll go to Grandma's, but only if we leave at 6 a.m. so we can be back in time for the Sunday clinic window. Methadone becomes the invisible guest at every family gathering, never seen, but always considered. If there are kids involved, things get even more delicate. You don't explain everything, but they pick up on more than you think. They know which mornings feel tense. They've heard the whispers about appointments and medicine and a better way. They've sat in the car outside the clinic eating dry cereal from a Ziploc bag, wondering why everyone looks tired. They become experts in reading moods, measuring silence, and adapting to the unpredictable. And then there's the paperwork. Oh, the paperwork. You thought taxes were bad. Try navigating Medicaid approval for take-homes. Try appealing a denied dose adjustment while also managing your own full-time job. Try sitting in a waiting room while your loved one fights tears in an office over a missed counselling session. It's bureaucracy, but emotionally charged, like a DMV where everyone's on the edge of something. Still, you stay. Because you see the progress. You see the way your partner sleeps through the night now. The way they eat breakfast without shaking. The way they laugh more. You see how they're rebuilding trust, not just with you, but with themselves. And you remember that methadone didn't save them alone. You did too, in 100 invisible ways. You made space for recovery in the middle of your shared life. But let's not sugarcoat it. There are days you're tired. Days you wonder what it would be like to love someone without a clinic schedule attached. Days you want to scream at a system that demands so much from someone already trying so hard. You feel guilty for those thoughts, but they're real, and they're valid. Because loving someone on methadone is an act of grace, but also of endurance. It's not about grand gestures. It's about showing up, packing snacks, setting alarms, listening to venting sessions about rude nurses and confusing regulations. It's about being the steady hand when the rest of the world keeps wobbling. And maybe, just maybe, it's about redefining what strength looks like, not as stoic independence, but as the quiet courage to love someone through their healing, even when the journey comes with government forms, long car rides, and a pocket full of mints to mask the aftertaste of survival. The 21st century arrives, and suddenly everyone's a methadone expert, or at least a very passionate commentator with Wi-Fi. Online forums become support groups, battlegrounds, and rumour mills. Twitter erupts every time someone mentions addiction treatment or posts a photo of a clinic line. And somewhere, buried under hashtags and hot takes, are the real stories, shared quietly, one post at a time, hoping someone is actually listening. Once upon a time, methadone debates were confined to city council meetings and overly tense Thanksgiving dinners. Now they happen 24/7 globally, in 280 characters or less. Scroll through Twitter and you'll find it all. Advocates calling for reform, critics shouting about trading one drug for another, patients venting about clinic policies, and bots, probably, arguing about whether methadone is a government conspiracy. It's chaos, but it's also conversation, and for something so historically stigmatized, that's a small miracle. Social media gave people what methadone clinics never did, a voice. Patients who once whispered about their treatment now post selfies on dose anniversaries. 3 years stable today, someone might write, alongside a picture of a coffee cup and a sunrise. It's not for likes, it's for survival. A declaration that they're still here, still fighting, still human. Meanwhile, support forums like Reddit's r/opiates recovery, or Facebook groups with names like Methadone Warriors or Recovery and Maintenance Support turn into digital lifelines. People swap tapering schedules, compare side effects, and debate the merits of liquid versus tablets. They post questions like, is it normal to cry for no reason at 40 grams? Or anyone else feel like they've aged 10 years since starting? No one rolls their eyes. Everyone understands. It's the methadone group chat you didn't know you needed. But the internet, as always, is a double-edged spoon. For every thread offering empathy, there's a viral comment declaring methadone just another crutch. For every heartfelt TikTok about someone's recovery journey, there's a YouTube rant claiming methadone is a scam pushed by Big Pharma. And in the comment sections, the same arguments swirl endlessly. It saved my life. It ruined mine. It's better than being dead. It's worse than being numb. You begin to wonder if anyone's actually listening, or just waiting for their turn to type. The debate gets even messier when celebrities enter the chat. If a famous actor admits to using methadone during recovery, it might be praised as brave or dragged as weak. News outlets run headlines like "Star opens up about treatment struggles and is methadone the new Hollywood fix?" As if life-saving medication is the latest skincare trend. Public discourse veers between sensationalism and oversimplification because nuance doesn't trend nearly as well as outrage. And yet, amidst the chaos, progress happens. Online advocacy has helped push for policy changes, reduce stigma, and demand better treatment access. Hashtags like #EndStigma and #MedicationIsRecovery connect thousands of voices across time zones and experiences. Petitions circulate. Misinformation gets corrected, eventually. People find community in the scroll. Even clinic staff occasionally join in, posting about new take-home policies or sharing tips for patients trying to navigate insurance. It's not always polished, but it's real. Because behind every tweet, every angry post, every shaky Reddit reply written at 3 a.m., there's a person trying to be heard. And that's the real story of methadone in the digital age. Not just the arguments, but the people in between them, the ones sharing hope in comment sections, the ones responding to trolls with facts and patience, the ones posting, not to go viral, but to survive. Because in a world that often silences addiction and shames recovery, even a single post can feel like a lifeline. Even a badly lit selfie in front of a clinic door can say, "I'm here, I'm trying, don't look away." And sometimes that's more powerful than any algorithm. So tonight, as you settle into your clean bed, far from the endless lines and fluorescent lights of a 1970s methadone clinic, maybe take a moment to be quietly grateful for the little things. Hot water, honest doctors, and the freedom to drink coffee that doesn't come with a warning label. Because history, especially the history of addiction, has never been simple or tidy or fair. It's a story of big promises, endless paperwork, and the kind of stubborn hope only humans can muster when faced with a choice between chaos and a cup of something slightly bitter but technically medicinal. It's easy, looking back, to judge the past, to shake your head at the scientists who thought swapping one addiction for another was progress, or at the bureaucrats who believed healing could be measured in urine samples and signature sheets. But for every mistake, there were millions of quiet victories, parents tucking their kids in after another clean day, friends cheering each other on, entire communities learning to see addiction as something that needed compassion, not just condemnation. Maybe you know someone who's walked this path. Maybe you've walked it yourself. If so, know that you're in good company. A long, messy, courageous line of people who kept showing up, even when it meant facing old habits, new rules, or just another Monday morning in a clinic waiting room. So as you drift off tonight, tucked safely in a world where hope is easier to find and help is just a phone call or a kind stranger away, whisper a little thank you. To the researchers who tried, the patients who endured, the families who loved fiercely, and even the stubborn bureaucrats who thought that maybe, just maybe, there could be a way out. History may be complicated, but it's also proof that people are resilient, resourceful, and a little bit ridiculous. And that's what makes it worth dreaming about, even as you fall asleep. Good night, and be kind to yourself. You've earned it.